My son said, "We already listed your house." At 71, I gave an answer he never expected. I was folding laundry when my son called. That was my life at 71, folding someone else's towels in someone else's house, while my phone sat on the dryer vibrating against the old chipped paint. I saw his name, Michael, my oldest, my firstborn, the baby I held in a rocking chair at 2 in the morning while his father slept, because that was what mothers did. We sacrificed sleep so our husbands could work. We sacrificed our bodies so our children could live. Then we sacrificed our homes so our families could have something to fight over after we died. I answered the phone. He said, "Mom, we need to talk about the house." I said, "What about it?" He said, "We listed it this morning. The realtor is coming by at 4. I stopped folding. The towel was still in my hands. A blue towel. His wife Karen had bought a set of them last spring. Expensive ones from that store in the mall where I could never afford to shop. I said, "What do you mean you listed it?" He said, "Your house, Mom. The one you raised us in. The one on Maple Street. We talked about this. We had the conversation. You agreed." I did not agree. I never agreed. But that was the thing about my family. They turned my silence into permission. They turned my confusion into consent. I was 71 years old, and my memory was fine, but they treated me like I was already gone, like I was a ghost standing in the kitchen while they divided up my bones.
Let me start from the beginning. Not the very beginning, because that would take too long and you would fall asleep before I got to the part where my heart stopped beating, but the beginning of the end, the part where I still believed my children loved me. My name is Margaret. Everyone calls me Maggie, except my husband, who calls me nothing anymore. We have been married for 43 years. His name is Robert. He is 73. We have 3 children. Michael is the oldest, then Diane, then the youngest Peter. Peter was my soft one, the one who still hugged me at 40, the one who called just to ask how my day was. But Peter lives in Oregon now, 2,000 miles away. That matters later. Robert and I built that house on Maple Street in 1987. I remember the closing. I wore a blue dress. My mother gave me a cutting from her rosebush, and I planted it by the front door. That rosebush is still there. I wonder if the new owners will keep it. I wonder if anyone will tell them that a woman who loved roses put that in the ground with her own hands while her 3 children watched from the porch. We raised our family there. Birthday parties with store-bought cake because I was never good at baking. Science projects that exploded in the kitchen. Prom photos on the stairs. College acceptance letters taped to the refrigerator. Then the grandchildren came. Emily and Jack from Michael, Chloe from Diane, little Leo from Peter. But Leo is 6 now, and I have not seen him in 8 months. The trouble started after Robert retired. He got quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of 2 people who know each other's breathing. The other kind. The quiet that means something is being hidden. He started taking long drives. He would leave after breakfast and come back after dinner. I asked where he went. He said nowhere, just driving. I asked if he wanted company. He said no. That was the first crack. Small, like a hairline fracture in a windshield. You think you can ignore it. You think it will hold. Then the bank called, a woman named Patricia. She said, "Mrs. Harris, this is a routine verification. Did you authorize a withdrawal of $15,000 from your joint savings yesterday?" I said no. I said, "I have not touched that account in months." She said, "Well, the withdrawal was processed at the downtown branch. The signature is yours." I said, "Can you send me a copy of that signature?" She said, "I will fax it to you." I drove to the library because we did not have a fax machine at home anymore. I stood there watching the paper come out, slow and gray. The signature was not mine. It was close, but it was not mine. Robert had practiced. He had tried so hard to copy the way I loop my M. But he forgot that I never dot the second A in Margaret. That is my little thing. I have done it since high school. The signature had a dot. I confronted him that night. He was sitting in his recliner watching a baseball game he did not care about. I held the paper in my hand. I said, "Robert, why did you take $15,000 from our savings?" He did not look at me. He said, "We needed it." I said, "For what?" He said, "For the car." I said, "What car?" He said, "My car needed a new transmission." I said, "You drive a 2015 Honda Civic. A new transmission does not cost $15,000. He turned off the television. That was the first time in months he looked me in the eye. He said, "Maggie, please, just let it go." I said, "No." He said, "You are going to make everything harder than it needs to be." That sentence stayed with me. You are going to make everything harder than it needs to be. That was his way of saying my pain was an inconvenience. My questions were a burden. My existence was a problem he had to manage. I found out about the woman 3 weeks later. Her name is Carol. She works at the bank. Not the branch where Robert took the money. A different branch. A smaller one near the highway. She is 58. Divorced. Bleaches her hair. Wears too much perfume. I know all of this because Michael told me. Not because he wanted to help me. Because he slipped. He said, Mom, you have to understand Dad is going through something. Carol makes him feel young. I said, how do you know about Carol? His face went white. He said, I just know. I said, have you met her? He said, once. At lunch. I said, you had lunch with your father and the woman he is sleeping with.
He said, Mom, please do not say it like that. I said, how should I say it? He said, Dad is unhappy. I said, I have been unhappy for 20 years, Michael. I did not steal our money and lie to your face. He said, that is different. I said, how? He did not answer. That was the moment I started to see it. The slow shift. My children had chosen a side, and it was not mine. Diane called me the next day. She said, Mom, I heard you confronted Dad about the money. I said, he stole from us, Diane. She said, he did not steal it. He is your husband. It is joint money. I said, joint means we both decide. She said, Mom, you are being dramatic. I said, he is having an affair. She said, he is not having an affair. He has a friend. I said, a friend named Carol, who he takes money to buy gifts for. She said, how do you know he bought gifts? I said, because I checked the credit card statement he thought I would not see. $2,000 at a jewelry store in the mall, $800 at a hotel near the airport. Diane was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Mom, what do you want me to do about it? I said, I want you to be on my side. She said, I am on no one's side. That is called being neutral. I said, there is no neutral when your father is lying to your mother. She said, okay, Mom, I have to go pick up Chloe from soccer. I love you. Call me later. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say that was wrong. She said, I love you, the way you say I love you to a cashier at the grocery store. Automatic. Empty.
Just words you put at the end of a conversation so you do not have to feel guilty. Peter called from Oregon. He said, Mom, I heard about Dad. I said, what did you hear? He said, Michael told me you are making things difficult. I said, making things difficult? Peter, I found out your father has been having an affair for over a year. He took $15,000 from our savings. He has been lying to my face every single day. Peter said, I know, Mom, I believe you, but you have to think about the big picture. I said, what big picture? He said, the house, the retirement, the grandkids. If you make this a legal thing, it is going to cost everyone. I said, cost everyone what? He said, money, time, energy. Mom, you are 71. Do you really want to spend your last years in a courtroom? I said, my last years? I am not dying, Peter. He said, that is not what I meant. I said, what did you mean? He did not answer. That was the second crack, the one that goes all the way through. I started watching after that. Not just Robert. Everyone. Michael and Karen came for dinner every Sunday. I cooked. I cleaned. I watched the kids while they sat in the living room and talked about things they would not say in front of me. Karen would give me these looks. Pity looks. Like I was a dog she felt sorry for but did not want to take home. Michael stopped hugging me. He would pat my shoulder. A quick pat. Like you pat a countertop to see if it is sturdy. Diane started bringing her own food to family dinners.
Gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free. She said it was for her health. I think she was afraid I would poison her. Not really, but the message was clear. She did not trust what I gave her. The worst part was the silence from Robert. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He just stopped talking to me altogether. We lived in the same house. We slept in the same bed, but he would lie on his side with his back to me and scroll through his phone. I knew he was texting her. I could see the blue light on his face. I could hear the small sounds of his thumbs moving across the screen. I would lie there in the dark and think about the woman I used to be, the woman who danced in the kitchen with him to a song on the radio, the woman who believed him when he said forever. I started sleeping in the guest room. He did not ask why. He did not say goodnight. He just moved to the middle of the bed and spread out like he had been waiting for me to leave. That was the spring. By summer, I had talked to a lawyer. a woman named Denise with gray hair and kind eyes. She said, "Mrs. Harris, you have options. You have been married for 43 years. You are entitled to half of everything." I said, "I do not want half of everything. I want my house." She said, "The house is marital property. Your husband cannot sell it without your signature." I said, "He would not sell it. It is our home." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Mrs. Harris, has your husband mentioned selling the house?" I said, "No."
She said, "Has anyone in your family mentioned selling the house?" I thought about it. Michael had said something a few weeks ago. He said, "Mom, you should think about downsizing. This house is too big for you and Dad." I said, "It is not too big." He said, "You are not getting any younger. The stairs are dangerous. What if you fall?" I said, "I am not going to fall." He said, "You cannot predict that." I said, "Michael, why are you pushing this?" He said, "I am just worried about you." I did not believe him, but I did not say that. I just said, "I will think about it." Denise told me to document everything, write down every conversation, save every text message, keep a journal of dates and times. I bought a notebook at the drugstore, a green one. I wrote down the date Robert took the money. I wrote down the date I found out about Carol. I wrote down the things my children said to me, the words that felt like small cuts. "Mom, you are being dramatic. Mom, you are making things difficult. Mom, you have to think about the big picture." The big picture. That phrase became a knife they twisted every time I opened my mouth. In August, Michael asked me to watch Emily and Jack for the weekend. He and Karen were going to a wedding in Connecticut. I said, "Of course." I always said, "Of course." That was my problem. I never said no. I never said I am tired. I never said I have my own life. I just said, "Of course," and opened my arms and let them take whatever they wanted. I watched the kids. I made pancakes.
I took them to the park. I read them stories at night. Emily is 7. She asked me, "Grandma, why does Grandpa sleep in a different room now?" I said, "Because he snores, sweetheart." She said, "Daddy snores too, but Mommy still sleeps with him." I said, "Well, every family is different." She said, "Okay." Then she hugged me and fell asleep. That hug stayed with me for days. The way her small arms fit around my neck. The way she smelled like strawberry shampoo in summer. I thought, at least I have them. At least no one can take the grandchildren. I was wrong about that too. September came. The leaves started turning. I love autumn in New England. The way the light gets soft and golden. The way the air smells like wood smoke and apples. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee. The rose bush my mother gave me was still blooming. Small red roses. They looked like hearts. I was thinking about my mother. She died 10 years ago. Congestive heart failure. She was 82. I held her hand when she went. She squeezed my fingers, and then she was gone. I thought about what she would say if she could see me now, living in a house where my husband did not speak to me, raising children who looked at me like a problem to be solved. I think she would be sad, but I think she would understand. She knew what it was like to be a woman no one listened to. That afternoon, Michael came over, without Karen, without the kids. He said, "Mom, we need to talk." I said, "Okay." He sat down at the kitchen table. Same table where he did his homework. Same table where I taught him to write his name. He said, "Mom, we are worried about you." I said, "Why?" He said, "You have been acting strange lately." I said, "Strange how?" He said, "You are always writing in that notebook. You are always on the phone with that lawyer. People are talking, Mom." I said, "What people?" He said, "Family, friends, people who care about you." I said, "If they care about me, they can say it to my face." He said, "Mom, please, just listen. We think you should see a doctor." I said, "I am not sick, Michael." He said, "We think you might be showing early signs of dementia." I laughed. I actually laughed. He did not laugh. He just sat there with this serious face, this concerned son face. And I realized he was not worried about me. He was worried about what I might do. He was worried about the notebook. He was worried about the lawyer. He was trying to make me seem crazy so no one would believe me when I told them what was happening. I said, "Michael, get out of my house." He said, "Mom." I said, "Get out." He stood up slow. He walked to the door. He turned around and said, "I am trying to help you." I said, "You are trying to bury me." He left. The door closed. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I opened my notebook and wrote down everything he said. That was the moment I knew. Not just suspected. Knew. My family was not confused. They were not neutral. They were building a case against me. They were laying the groundwork to take everything.
And the worst part was, I loved them. I still loved them. Even as I wrote down their words like evidence in a trial I knew I would lose. Because you cannot win against people you love. You just cannot. October. Robert moved out. He said he needed space. He said the marriage was not working. He said we should consider a separation. I said, "You mean you want to move in with Carol?" He did not deny it. He just said, "I will send you money every month." I said, "What money?" "Our money." He said, "I will be fair." I said, "You have never been fair." He packed a bag, a small black bag. He walked out the front door. He did not look back. I watched him get into his car, the Honda with the new transmission that cost $15,000. He drove away. The rosebush shivered in the wind. I stood in the doorway until I could not see his car anymore. Then I closed the door and leaned against it, and I cried. I cried the way you cry when you are alone in a house that used to be full of noise, and now there is just the sound of the refrigerator humming and your own breathing. The money did not come. October passed. November passed. I called Robert. He did not answer. I left messages. He did not call back. I called Michael. He said, "Mom, Dad is going through a transition." I said, "I need money for groceries." He said, "I will send you something." He sent $200. That was it. $200 for a woman who had raised him for 18 years, who had paid for his college, who had helped him with the down payment on his first house. $200. I cashed the check. I bought food. I ate alone. Thanksgiving came. No one called. No one invited me. I sat in the guest room with a frozen dinner, turkey and mashed potatoes, the kind that comes in a plastic tray with a film you have to peel back. I watched the Macy's parade on the small television Robert left behind, the one with the bad antenna. The picture kept breaking into snow. I thought about all the Thanksgivings I had cooked, a big turkey, the gravy from scratch, the pies I stayed up late making because Michael liked pumpkin and Diane liked apple and Peter liked both. I thought about the table stretched out with leaves, the good china, the candles, my mother sitting at the end of the table next to my father, who was already starting to forget things. That was the year before he died. He kept asking where the butter was. My mother kept passing it to him. She never got frustrated. She just smiled and handed him the butter. That was love, the kind that keeps handing you things even when you have lost the ability to remember. December. Peter called from Oregon. He said, "Mom, I am sorry I have not been in touch." I said, "It is okay." He said, "Things are crazy here with Leo and work." I said, "I understand." He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am fine." I lied. I was not fine. I was running out of money. I was eating less so the groceries would last longer. I was afraid to turn on the heat because the bill was too high. I wore 3 sweaters in my own house, the house I had lived in for 36 years, the house my mother had helped me buy with the money from my grandmother's estate. That money was mine. My grandmother left it to me, not to Robert, not to the marriage, to me. And I had put it into the down payment on Maple Street because I believed in building a home for my family. I did not know then that they would use that home to build a case against me. Christmas Eve, I was alone. I put up a small tree, a tabletop tree from the drugstore. It came with tiny plastic ornaments already attached. I plugged it in, the lights flickered. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same wine I used to serve at dinner parties, the cheap kind, $3 a bottle. I sat in the dark living room and looked at the tree, and I thought about the last Christmas we were all together. 2 years ago. Emily was 5. She wore a red dress. She sat on Santa's lap at the mall and asked for a doll. Jack was 3. He cried because he was scared. We took pictures. We laughed. Robert kissed me on the cheek in front of everyone. That was before Carol, before the money, before my children started looking at me like I was already dead. At midnight, my phone rang. It was Diane. She said, "Merry Christmas, Mom." I said, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." She said the kids wanted to say hi. Chloe got on the phone. She said, "Grandma, I got a new bike." I said, "That is wonderful." She said, "It is pink." I said, "Pink is my favorite color." She said, "I know. That is why I picked it." I cried after she hung up. Not sad tears, exactly. Just tears. The kind that come from nowhere and everywhere at once. January. The coldest month. The month everything ended.
Michael called on a Tuesday. He said, "Mom, we need to talk about the house." I said, "What about it?" He said, "We listed it this morning. The realtor is coming by at 4. I did not agree. I never agreed. But that was the thing about my family. They had been planning this for months, maybe longer. They had been laying the tracks while I was standing on the platform watching the train come. I said, "Michael, what do you mean you listed my house?" He said, "Mom, we talked about this." I said, "We did not talk about it." He said, "Yes, we did. At Thanksgiving. You said you were open to selling." I said, "I was not at Thanksgiving. No one invited me to Thanksgiving." There was a pause, a long one. Then he said, "Mom, you are confused." I said, "I am not confused. I spent Thanksgiving alone eating a frozen dinner." He said, "That is not what happened." I said, "Michael, I was there." He said, "You are misremembering." I said, "I am not misremembering." He said, "Mom, listen to me. You agreed to sell the house. You signed papers." I said, "I signed nothing." "Yes, you did. In October, when Dad came by with the realtor, you signed the listing agreement." I said, "I never signed anything in October. Robert moved out in October."
He said Dad came back the next week with the paperwork. You let him in, you had coffee, you signed. I said, "That did not happen." He said, "Mom, I was there. I saw you." My hand started shaking. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed. The room was cold. I had not turned on the heat in 3 days. I said, "Michael, you are lying to me." He said, "Mom, I am not lying. You are sick. You forget things." I said, "I am not sick." He said, "The family has been worried about you for a long time. We have been documenting things. Your confusion, your memory lapses, your mood swings. We talked to your doctor." I said, "You talked to my doctor without my permission?" He said, "We were concerned." I said, "That is illegal, Michael." He said, "We have a lawyer, Mom." He said, "It is called a guardianship petition. We are asking the court to appoint a guardian to manage your affairs, because you are not capable anymore, because you are a danger to yourself." I could not breathe. The room was spinning. "A guardianship?" He said, "Yes, Mom, for your own protection." I said, "You are trying to steal my house." He said, "We are trying to help you. The house is too much for you. You cannot afford the taxes. You cannot afford the upkeep. Selling is the best option." I said, "I do not want to sell." He said, "You already signed. The house is listed. The realtor is coming at 4 to put up the sign." I said, "I will call the police." He said, "For what?" I said, "For breaking into my house." He said, "Mom, it is not your house. It is Dad's house too. And he wants to sell." I said, "I will fight this." He said, "Mom, please, do not make this harder than it needs to be." There it was again, that sentence. You are making everything harder than it needs to be. As if my resistance was the problem. As if my refusal to disappear quietly was the real betrayal. I hung up the phone. I called Denise, the lawyer. She did not answer. It was Tuesday morning. She was probably in court. I left a message. I said, "Denise, it is Maggie. My son says they listed my house. He says I signed papers, but I did not sign anything. He says they are filing a guardianship petition. Please call me back, please." Then I sat on the edge of the bed, and I waited. The realtor came at 4. I saw her car pull into the driveway, a white SUV. A woman got out, blonde, 40-something. She was carrying a for sale sign, the kind with the metal post you hammer into the ground. She walked toward the front yard, toward the rosebush. I watched her from the window. She looked at the house. She looked at her phone. She looked at the sign. Then she started walking toward the front door. I opened the door before she could knock. I said, "Can I help you?" She said, "Hi, I am Brenda from Remax. I am here to put up the listing sign. I spoke with your son Michael. He said you were expecting me." I said, "I was not expecting you." She looked confused. She looked at her phone again. She said, "I am sorry, ma'am. I must have the wrong address. This is 142 Maple Street, correct?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then I am in the right place. Your son signed the listing agreement last week." I said, "My son does not own this house. I do." She said, "I understand, but the agreement was signed by the owner." I said, "The owner did not sign anything." She said, "Well, the signature is on file. I can show you if you like." She pulled out a tablet. She scrolled. She turned the screen toward me. It was my signature, right there on a listing agreement for 142 Maple Street. The asking price was $420,000. My name was printed at the bottom, Margaret Harris, and next to it my signature, but it was not mine. It was close, just like the withdrawal slip from the bank. The same careful forgery. The same missing dot on the A. I looked at Brenda. She looked at me. She was starting to understand that something was very wrong. I said, "That is not my signature." She said, "Ma'am, I am sure there has been a misunderstanding." I said, "There has been no misunderstanding. My son forged my signature. He and my husband have been stealing from me, and now they are trying to take my house." Brenda said, "I am so sorry. I have to call my broker." I said, "You do that, but you are not putting that sign in my yard." She left. She got back in her white SUV and she drove away. The for sale sign was still in her back seat. I watched her go. Then I went inside and I closed the door and I locked it. I locked all the locks, the deadbolt, the chain.
The little slide lock Robert installed years ago after someone broke into the garage. I stood in the hallway and I looked at the walls, the family photos. Michael in his cap and gown, Diane at her wedding, Peter holding baby Leo, Robert and me on our 30th anniversary. We were smiling. We were happy. Or we looked happy. Sometimes I cannot tell the difference anymore. Denise called back at 6. I told her everything. The phone call, the realtor, the forged signature, the guardianship petition. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Maggie, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. Do not sign anything. Do not talk to anyone from your family. Do not answer the door if they come." I said, "What about the house?" She said, "The house is still yours. They cannot sell it without your real signature. But the guardianship thing is serious. If they file that petition and the court agrees, you could lose control of everything, your money, your property, your medical decisions." I said, "They cannot do that. I am not crazy." She said, "I know you are not crazy, but they have been building a paper trail, doctor visits, statements from family members. They might have convinced someone that you are not capable." I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You fight, you show up, you prove them wrong." I said, "I am 71 years old, Denise. I am tired." "I know you are tired, but you are also strong. I have seen women like you before." Women who have been underestimated their whole lives. Women who have given everything to everyone and have nothing left for themselves. And then when their backs are against the wall, they find something they did not know they had. I said, "What is that?" She said, "Rage. Good, clean rage. The kind that keeps you alive." That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark living room with the small tabletop tree still lit. It was January, but I had not taken the tree down. I could not bear to. It was the only light in the house. I thought about my mother. I thought about the rose bush. I thought about the day we closed on this house. I was 35 years old. Robert was 37. Michael was 8. Diane was 5. Peter was 2. We stood in the empty living room and Robert spun me around. He said, "We did it, Maggie. We have a home." I said, "We have a home." And I meant it. I meant it with every cell of my body. That home was my heart. It was the place where I became a mother, where I became a grandmother, where I became a woman who believed that love meant sacrifice, that giving meant you would receive, that raising children meant they would raise you when you could not stand on your own. I was wrong. The next morning, I went to Denise's office. I wore my good coat, the black one. I put on lipstick. I brushed my hair. I wanted to look like someone who was not falling apart. Denise was waiting. She had papers spread across her desk. She said, "I filed an emergency response to the guardianship petition. The court date is in 2 weeks. I said, 2 weeks? She said, "Until then, do not talk to your family. Do not let them into your house. Do not answer their calls." I said, "What if they come anyway?" She said, "You call the police." I said, "They are my children." She said, "Maggie, they are trying to take everything you have. They are not acting like your children right now. They are acting like predators. And you are the prey." I said, "That is a horrible thing to say." She said, "I know. It is also true." I went home. I locked the doors. I turned off my phone. I sat in the kitchen, and I looked at the table. The table where I had taught my children to read, where I had helped them with math homework, where I had served them soup when they were sick, where I had held Michael's hand after his first girlfriend broke his heart, where I had told Diane she could be anything she wanted to be, where I had promised Peter that no matter what happened, I would always love him. I still love them. That is the part I cannot explain. After everything they have done, I still love them. I love Michael, even though he looked me in the eye and lied. I love Diane, even though she chose neutral over her own mother. I love Peter, even though he is 2,000 miles away and has not visited in a year. I love Robert, even though he threw away 43 years for a woman who bleaches her hair. I love them, the way you love something that is killing you.
The way you love the cold when you have been freezing so long you cannot remember what warmth feels like. The court date came. February. It was snowing, big, wet flakes that stuck to the windows. I put on my good coat again. I took the bus to the courthouse because I did not have a car anymore. Robert took the car, the Honda, the one with the transmission that cost $15,000. I sat in the back of the bus next to a young woman holding a baby. The baby was crying. The woman looked exhausted. I wanted to tell her it would get easier, but I did not, because it does not get easier. It just gets different, and sometimes different is worse. The courthouse was old, gray stone, high ceilings, the kind of place that makes you feel small. Denise was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. She said, "Are you ready?" I said no. She said, "That is okay. No one is ever ready." We went inside. The courtroom was half empty. A few lawyers, a few families, a judge with tired eyes and gray hair. She looked like me, older, worn down, the kind of woman who had seen everything and stopped being surprised. Michael was there. Robert was there. Diane was there. Even Karen was there. They sat on one side of the room. I sat on the other. No one looked at me. No one said hello. They just stared straight ahead, like I was a stranger, like I was not the woman who had changed their diapers and kissed their scraped knees and stayed up all night when they had fevers. The judge called the case. Denise stood up. She explained everything: the forged signature, the stolen money, the affair, the pattern of manipulation. She showed the court my notebook, the green one. She showed the judge the withdrawal slip with the forged signature, the listing agreement with the same missing dot. She showed doctor's reports proving I was mentally competent. She showed bank records proving I had managed my own finances for 40 years. Then she sat down. Michael's lawyer stood up, a man in an expensive suit. He said, "Your Honor, the family is deeply concerned about Mrs. Harris. She has shown signs of confusion. Her children have witnessed her forget appointments, misplace important documents, become paranoid about her family. They believe she is no longer capable of making sound decisions. The guardianship is in her best interest." The judge looked at me. She said, "Mrs. Harris, would you like to speak?" I stood up. My legs were shaking. I held onto the table in front of me. I said, "Your Honor, I am not confused. I am not paranoid. I am a 71-year-old woman whose husband emptied our savings account to buy gifts for his mistress, whose son forged my signature to sell my house out from under me, whose daughter sat at a dinner table with me and pretended everything was fine while she helped them plan this. I raised those people. I fed them. I clothed them. I loved them. And they have been lying to me for months. They have been telling everyone I am losing my mind so they could take what is mine. I am not losing my mind. I am losing my family. And that is worse. That is so much worse. The courtroom was quiet. The judge looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at Michael, then at Robert, then at Diane. She said, "I am denying the guardianship petition. Mrs. Harris is clearly competent. The evidence of forgery is troubling. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation. In the meantime, the house belongs to Mrs. Harris. No one is to enter the property without her permission. No one is to attempt to sell the property. If I hear otherwise, there will be consequences." Michael's face went white. Robert looked at the floor. Diane started crying. Karen just stared at me like I had done something wrong, like I was the one who had ruined everything. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The snow had stopped. The sun was coming out. I stood at the top of the steps and I breathed. The air was cold and clean. I thought about going home, to Maple Street, to the Rosebush, to the quiet house with the small tabletop tree still lit. I thought about making coffee, about sitting on the porch, about watching the snow melt and the grass grow, and the seasons change without anyone telling me I was crazy. But I also thought about the silence, the phone that would not ring, the holidays I would spend alone, the grandchildren I might never see again.
Emily with her strawberry shampoo, Jack with his shy smile, Chloe with her pink bike, Leo who is 6 and probably does not remember what my face looks like. That is the cost of winning. You win the house, you win the money, you win the right to be left alone, but you lose everything that mattered. The noise, the chaos, the messy, complicated love that hurts so much, but also keeps you alive. I am 72 now. This happened a year ago. I still live on Maple Street. The rose bush is bigger. I put new pictures on the walls. Pictures of me, pictures of my mother, pictures of my grandmother whose money bought this house. I do not have pictures of my children anymore. I took them down. Not because I stopped loving them, because I could not look at their faces and remember who they used to be. The children who ran through these halls with muddy shoes and loud voices and hearts full of love. Those children are gone. They grew into strangers, and strangers do not belong on my walls. Robert called me last month. He said Carol left him. He said he made a mistake. He asked if he could come home. I said no. He asked why. I said because I am not your home anymore. You sold that. You gave it away, and you cannot buy it back. Michael does not speak to me. Diane sends a card on my birthday. It says, "Love Diane" on the envelope, but there is no message inside. Just her name, printed, like she forgot how to write by hand. Peter calls once a month. We talk about the weather. We talk about Leo.
We do not talk about the court case. We do not talk about the forgery. We do not talk about the guardianship. We pretend none of it happened. That is what my family does best. They pretend. Sometimes I sit on the porch and I watch the cars go by. I wonder if my grandchildren will ever come back. I wonder if they will remember me. I wonder if Michael will tell them the truth, or if he will tell them their grandmother was sick, that she had to be put away for her own good, that she chose the house over them. I chose nothing. I just refused to disappear, and that is the only crime I committed. I refused to vanish quietly, so my family could divide my life like a pie. I stayed. I kept breathing. I kept fighting. And for that, they will never forgive me.